Hello, world. Today's guest is Wilfrid Wong. Wilfrid is an international human rights activist who's been investigating a phenomena called satanic ritual abuse for the past 27 years. Satanic ritual abuse, also called SRA, is a brutal form of abuse on children, youth, and vulnerable adults, consisting of physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, and it involves the use of Satanist rituals. This was a wild and terrifying conversation. So grab your Bible and buckle up, folks. Enjoy. So thanks again for doing this. If you could just explain to the people listening sort of who you are and a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm a former barrister. In England, there are two types of lawyer, solicitor or barrister. Barrister does the work, legal work, mainly in the courts and represent clients in the courts. It's a profession divided between solicitors and barristers in this country. And I used to be a barrister, but now I'm working full-time on other issues. And one of those issues is Satanist ritual abuse, which I have worked on for the last 27 years. How it started was when a British MP, Member of Parliament, approached me about a Satanist ritual abuse case that he had been approached about and asked me to get involved because he knew that I was involved in campaigning for children's rights. And I've done a lot of work over the last 27 years on children's rights issues, including child sex abuse, but also SRA. And it started from there. That was in January 1993. So more than 27 years now, I've been following this issue of SRA, speaking out on it, campaigning on it, sometimes writing articles, doing interviews, speaking at conferences, trying to get the word out, because this is a very hidden issue. And this is what makes it so difficult to deal with sometimes, is the general public's ignorance of the issue or disinterest in the issue, or sometimes their knee-jerk reaction of skepticism, which makes it difficult to get them to take action on the issue.
So explain, what exactly is SRA?
Satanist ritual abuse is a brutal form of mistreatment that is inflicted on children or vulnerable adults, and it involves psychological, physical, and sexual abuse, and it is done in the context of Satanist rituals. And it is normally, in most cases, done not as a one-off incident, but as a repeated form of abuse over a period of time, usually a period of years, that the victim is subjected to SRA. So it inflicts huge damage on the survivors. Some of the people who are subjected to SRA do not survive, unfortunately. Sometimes they are murdered as part of the ritual, usually in a ritualistic way. We call that ritual sacrifice. And it is the Satanist rituals and the Satanist beliefs that encompass this, what I would call atrocities against children and vulnerable adults. It's sex abuse and torture combined together, and it's repeated over and over. And it's hell, basically, for the victims who have to go through this. And when they come out at the other end, if they survive, and they try and tell their stories to others, usually they are victimized a second time by people rubbishing what they're trying to reveal and saying that can't be true, or you're telling lies, or you're delusional. And I would refer to that as a secondary form of abuse. So one thing that makes it so hard for the public to accept is because it's so awful. It's unimaginable horror. But it does exist. I think throughout human history, we have many examples of people thinking that, oh, well, we've already reached the depths of human depravity, can't get worse. Unfortunately, it does get worse. So there was a time in the UK, for example, not that long ago, when even child sex abuse was disbelieved because people found that too horrible to accept and just didn't want to believe that it was true. And the victims of child sex abuse who were trying to report it were disbelieved and were scolded or warned not to repeat their allegations again. And now we have the same kind of disbelief, in many cases leveled as SRA, although I'm pleased to say that the public interest in SRA and willingness to seriously consider it as a real issue is starting to shift in the right direction, at least in the UK. I know you have a struggle in America as well over this issue, but I think one advantage America has is that it's a more open society than the UK, and it's easier to talk openly about these subjects over there than in the UK or other parts of Europe.
So what was it like, or how did you become aware of this for the very first time? And
well,
who made you? Yeah. So I was basically just saying, like, who made you aware of it, and what was the situation?
Well, I had heard about this subject before January '93, when I first started working on it, and I had done some reading on the subject. So when I was asked to take on this issue, I wasn't totally unaware of what SRA consisted of. But in a way, I was thrown in at the deep end because I was asked to meet a group of SRA survivors who were being treated by a doctor, and all of them had dissociative identity disorder, DID, which used to be known as multiple personality disorder. So I saw some adults, for example, in front of me, shifting from their core adult personality to a little child personality that caused them to talk in a very different voice, act in a very different way. These fragmentation of their core personality into all these different, what we call alters, alternative personalities, is actually a survival mechanism more than a disease. It's not a disease, it's not a mental illness, it's a survival mechanism that victims of SRA, especially children, use, because what they're subjected to is so horrible, it's so horrific, that mentally a child cannot cope. So what they do is they fragment their mind into other personalities to cope with the torture and the abuse, and they let that personality bear the brunt of the suffering, and that enables the core personality to remain safe and distanced from it. So in many of these cases, you'll find child personalities who exist still at the time which they were created. So for example, there may be a case of an SRA survivor who formed a child personality in 1974, for example, when that person was being subjected to SRA. And many years later, that child personality may come up, for example, during therapy, and still think in that child personality, he or she will still think that it's 1974. There is also sometimes what you could call a guardian personality, who is like the bodyguard there to help protect the core personality. And that guardian personality can be very aggressive and overly assertive. And if it's a female, it might even take the form of, if it's a female core personality, the guardian might even take the form of a male to add to the aggressive nature of that altar.
Mm.
So it's a sad fact that about 80% of people suffering from DID are SRA survivors. That means the majority of DID sufferers have DID because since childhood they were subjected to the most horrible abuse and torture by Satanist abusers, and the end result, the only way they could mentally cope and survive was through the fragmentation of their core personality into all these different personalities. And I know of an SRA survivor, for example, who was abused since a very young age, since she was practically a baby, and she has hundreds of altars, literally hundreds. It's not impossible for them to integrate all their altars into the core personality, but it usually takes years of therapy to do that. It is a survival mechanism, because the alternative, if they couldn't split into their different personalities, would have been simply losing their mind, having a complete mental breakdown. So in order to survive, they have this. And it's interesting to note, some SRA survivors get so used to it and see the positive side of it that they find it hard sometimes to let go of the separate altars and integrate them into their core personality, because they've grown rather fond of having that altar, or too used to it, perhaps.
Okay.
So one way, I think, to find out more about SRA in a particular location or city is to talk to the therapists who specialize in dealing with DID, and see if they're willing to share with you what they know. Some of them may be afraid to talk about SRA because they think that it will damage their careers if they do so, but others will be more willing to just be upfront about it because they believe in exposing this evil. In fact, the only way to stop this evil is to expose it. And for too many years, it's been hidden from public knowledge. So I was in this building full of SRA survivors who were shifting from one altar to another. They were badly damaged. I felt so sorry for them. It can be a shock to anyone who's not seen this before. And the doctor told me that the local member of parliament had visited him on another occasion recently, and that she did not last more than about 1.5 hours before she made some excuse to leave, because it was just too disturbing for her to see. But yeah, in that sense, I was thrown in the deep end, and I stayed there the whole day, finding out what I could, and hearing the stories, very sad stories of some of the survivors.
Now, some of the things you hear about Satanism compared to what you're talking about, I know there's people in the UK that run these, quote, satanic temples, and they will openly discuss how Satanism is about the worship of oneself, or the introspective behavior of facing your own problems or facing your own demons, looking inward. and it's sort of a love affair with yourself. So how do these people differ from these sort of satanic covens that you've investigated?
Well, I think in essence, they don't really differ from them very much, but they are presenting a very small aspect of what they really believe. For example, I do surveillance on Satanist covens, and I know that they like to meet not only on the dates of the satanic calendar, they also like to meet on the birth dates of their members, because, as you said earlier, what the Satanist temple claims, that they also believe in the worship of oneself. So for them, the birthday is like the birth of God, because they regard themselves as being gods. And Satanism is not only about worshiping the devil as God, but considering oneself as God. And so the birthdays of their members is a date for them to have a ritual and a significant religious date, you could say. And so they haven't told the full story, which is that their worshipping themselves as gods does not negate their worshipping the devil as God. They're doing both. They're doing both. But they know people have generally a bad impression, very rightly so in my view, of the devil. So they keep the devil in the background and just say, oh, well, we're just worshipping ourselves. What's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that also leads to an attitude of we can do whatever we want, and there's no such thing as us doing wrong. We can do whatever we want, satisfy our desires, regardless of who it may harm, as long as we get our satisfaction. Because we are gods. We can do anything. God can do anything. I can do anything. And you've heard the phrase probably of do what thou wilt. Do whatever you want. And Anton LaVey, as you know, the former head of the Church of Satan in the USA, he summed it up as do whatever thou wilt is all the law that Satanists will have is to do whatever you want. And that, of course, includes doing whatever you want, even if it's at the expense of others, even if it causes harm to others. Doesn't matter, as long as you satisfy your wants. And after all, God can do whatever he wants. So I am a so-called God. I can do whatever I want. And all that matters is that I have my needs fulfilled, no matter how perverse those needs may be. Aleister Crowley, the leading Satanist in the UK, said the same thing. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that what Aleister Crowley said influenced Anton LaVey to say something very similar. And so this is the danger of this attitude of a person being God. It's not only that they can do whatever they want, they can do the most terrible things to others and justify it, not in an objective way, of course, it's purely subjective, but justify it to themselves on the belief that I'm all powerful, I'm God, I will decide what's right and wrong, because God decides what's right and wrong, and what's right is whatever satisfies my needs. So you imagine that belief in the hands of someone who believes that it's okay for adults to sexually abuse children. Well, as long as I get my needs satisfied, no matter how many children I abuse, do what thou wilt, I will do it. I am a God, and I will have my way. So this is the problem with this kind of presentation. They're trying to make Satanism seem harmless and respectable even, but they're not giving you the full picture. In practice, the full picture is you get practices like SRA, which of course they will more often than not, in fact, I've never heard of them actually acknowledging its existence, deny that it exists, because SRA is a very inconvenient reality that stops them from being mainstreamed. Especially in the USA, I believe Satanists are trying hard to get mainstream recognition as a supposedly respectable religion. Whereas in the UK, it's more hidden, but there are some moves towards more recognition. For example, in the Royal Navy in the UK, in 2004, they had recognition to have Satanist rituals done on Royal Navy ships. So
you're saying on the outside, basically, for face value and in terms of what they portray to the media is, like I mentioned before, it's an introspective look at worshiping oneself. You know, they don't portray that we can do whatever we want, and obviously the child abuse stuff, they don't want that to be in the public light. That's sort of, once you get behind the veil, they reveal that to you. It sort of reminds me of Scientology. Are you familiar with Scientology?
Yes, but so just to add what you mentioned about behind the veil, I know some British ex-Satanists who have since left Satanism, and they have blown the whistle on what goes on in Satanism. So some of the things I've said just now is backed up by those statements by ex-Satanists. That, as you rightly said, a lot of it is behind the veil, and they don't want the veil pulled. They want the veil to stay there. Right.
Like Scientology, for face value, they push this book called Dianetics, which basically, you know, it talks about being productive and getting things done and bettering yourself. And once you get inside and start to pay them all kinds of money, I mean, that's a huge thing, is they want money from you. That's how they survive, besides being tax exempt, of course. But once you sort of level up in Scientology, now they reveal to you this galactic confederacy ruled by this overlord by the name of Xenu. And you don't hear about any of that until you get inside and pay them a bunch of money. Otherwise, people would just think it's complete horseshit.
Yeah, you're right. That is I would describe as the worm on the hook. When you catch the fish, you got to put the worm on the hook. You just give them the hook, and the fish will never bite. So the worm on the hook for Satanists is what you described as the Satanic Temple claiming that it's about worship of self, and they'll probably bring in nice, attractive phrases like self-esteem, self-realization, etc., etc. And as with the book Dianetics for Scientologists, this is the worm on the hook for Satanists, draw people in. But the thing about Satanism is that, as with Scientology, as many people have alleged, I think, once you're in, it's pretty hard to get out. You may even find yourself being seriously threatened when you try to get out.
Right.
So once you bite on that attractive looking worm, like a fish, you're on the hook, and it's not going to be easy to get yourself off the hook. And there's going to be a lot of fighting that you're going to have to do. So it's better not to get in the first place.
Now, what have you studied on Anton LaVey? Do you think Anton LaVey was involved with any sort of child abuse or this pedophilia?
What I understand about LaVey is that there has been at least one allegation of SRA against him, apparently by a family member. I don't dwell a lot on US SRA cases for the simple reason that I've got more than enough UK SRA cases that more than fill up my plate. But this is what I understand from a US source who works on SRA, that there has been a serious allegation of SRA against Anton LaVey, at least one, if not more. The fact of the matter is, with Satanists especially, you should never take what they claim publicly at face value. You've got to look deep behind, because they are masters of deception. You know, I describe Satanists as Oscar-winning actors and actresses, because they put on Oscar-winning performances all their lives. Imagine, some of them are very respectable. They do respectable jobs. Some of them are even in government. But at night, when they believe that no one is watching and they're at their coven meetings, they do the most horrific things to children or vulnerable adults. And then they go back to respectability the next morning and